you know,
Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and tonight I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarcus Ted, how you doing this fine and lovely evening, sir?
Good man, it's good to see your shining face tonight here as we get ready to talk about gods, religions, and spirituality in D&D and TTRPGs. As we've been doing, we're going to break it down in segments, and we're going to talk about our own creations. And then at the end, if you guys have any questions, we'll take your questions, and we can talk more generally. Or if you want to ask about D&D cosmology, if we know about it, we'll talk about it. With that, we can jump right in. Let us talk about gods, religion, spirituality, and Aether Skies.
All
So,
right, so Aether Skies is not a world that has a rich God-filled world. So what does religion look like with that kind of backdrop?
Right. So one of the primers that I gave out was like kind of the ages of the world, and like it starts out like your traditional fantasy world, where it probably does have many pantheons and different gods that are revered and worshipped. But come age two, the gods have left. So, it doesn't leave a whole lot of room. But that being said, in the third age, which we are playing in now, there are religions and there is a lot of mysticism and the occult, right? And in some ways, I feel like occult is a pretty good stand in for spirituality and religion as well, right? And there's also cults, right? So that's about revering and worship as well. In addition to like just straight up, there are religions. It's just not necessarily your traditional. They're actually closer to maybe real world religions than to fictional or mythology. Theopolis is a holy city, right? So they're ruled by a theocracy, and so clearly there is religion there, but also like that is where the Knights of the Anti-Ether kind of come from. And in our first campaign, Ty's character played one of those, and they're religious zealots who want to purge Aether and reclaim the surface in the name of purity, right? And they want to do away with it. Unfortunately, right now, like all the cities and where most of the people live are sustained by it, right? So for them, it is a necessary evil, but at the same time, we have other things going on where maybe there isn't gods, but there are religions, and there are definitely cults. There are cults to, the things that have been locked behind the seal, and I'm sure there are other ones that are gonna pop up as well, right? So I feel like there's a lot of room for us to explore it in Nether Skies. We just haven't really done it yet.
So with an aspect of, it's a game dealing with eldritch horror, like beyond cults, I imagine like there could just straight up, be worship of these eldritch beings that are out there. There could be, those who are uh praying to, the unheard. They could be praying to the gods that have left, and maybe there's a fraction of that power that's out there that heeds the call even without um you know the aspect, um and I could even go so far as to say, given it's, Aether Skies and we've got floating cities and flying airships, I imagine the concept of air, the from an elementalist, standpoint, is probably, super, uh, respected, if not, straight up revered, because it is like literally, it's all around you. It's right in the freaking name. And it's absolutely merciless should you fall off. It's like you're done. Like, there is no, oh, let me, fly or feather fall or whatnot. Like you're gonna splat way down below.
That is definitely a side effect of living, miles in the sky. Yeah, and also like because there were gods at one point, that means during play, these old gods that are gone could also be rediscovered. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll answer your prayers or provide power per se or grant miracles. Much in the real world where it's an act of faith, right? But that being said, it doesn't mean that that faith might not have its own way of channeling the Aether, and some folks through a more religious and spiritual kind of process begin mastering the powers of Aether, even if they don't themselves understand that's what they're doing. uh and perhaps it is a different way of harnessing Aether that is different than how Ethermancers and Etherficers kind of do it. Matter of fact, in some ways, it is kind of like how an Etherficer might do it, in the sense that you're channeling through a conduit. In this case, it could be a religious conduit or a spiritual conduit, and also maybe something that's answering your prayers isn't the thing you intended, because we do have the Eldritch horrors, and that's definitely a part of things. where through the bleeds and the seeping through the seals, um, these forces could interact with the world and begin kind of developing uh you know priests and clerics that kind of go out and prophesize for them, uh and maybe there's some deception there. Maybe they present themselves in a way that is not what the cleric or the priest or the faithful think, right? Because in actuality it's an eldritch horror that's granting them their power and kind of manipulating and using them. But at the same time too, like, I think instead of having gods, we're going to develop specific religions. Like, we already have one religion, um in Theopolis. And I think they do have ways, or I don't think, I know they have ways that affecting the world that kind of seems like magic. Matter of fact, a lot of their abilities stem from their ability to kind of like throw off or disrupt the natural aether of the world, which they've deemed it as their enemy. And in some ways they're not wrong, because uh Aether, the magic in this world, is kind of hostile. It is like, it is, well, wielding magic in this world is more like trying to break a stallion than your traditional fantasy worlds, where you're just going to learn from a book and the magic does what you want it to do. In Other Skies, you can kind of make it do what you want it to, but it doesn't want to. It almost has a will of its own. And that being said, that could also be a thing that gets worshipped too. I can only imagine, like, this is what sustains the cities. This is what risen them from the surface world, where all these horrors are. It is their salvation, even though it may not be the most kind or gentle of forces. But at the end of the day, without it, they would have been destroyed because of whatever happened on the surface, as far as they know, or that's what they're taught. So I
Well,
imagine there would be religions around that as well.
so like when you look at like the D&D gods, like do any of the stories you hear really make you feel like, oh, it's all kind and gentle? Like it's like, okay, well, I'll bestow power upon you, but it's still a mortal enacting it. The gods are not stepping in and, you know, fixing the problems or, causing whatever. It's just it's creating a conduit. So like it's still mortal judgment. So I don't feel like, this situation of like, it's not all, puppies and fairies is any different than, any other fantasy religion out there.
Well, and also, like, you can look to the real world too, right? What about real world religions that really aren't based on gods per se, or worshiping of a god, right? Um, you can definitely have that, and but because it's a fantasy world, you know, you can have those religions still empower the people that believe in it strongly. I mean, in some ways, I almost see the priests and clerics in Aether Skies similar to paladins, right? Where paladins in 5e, they don't necessarily have to draw their divine power from a god, right? It's from their oaths itself. And there's no
Yep.
reason why we can't treat um all divine characters that way in Aether Skies. And that's actually kind of the way I'm leaning, with the exception of people that are more like more occult. And again, like, we're gonna explore that. Now, we have an upcoming Other Skies campaign in the works, and it's going to be after Ted's done running the current Zoo Mafia game. And I haven't seen everyone's characters yet, but if there's any religious characters, any paladins or clerics in the group, or even druids, which druids are actually a little bit easier because they just worship the forces of nature. Um, to an extent, and also like the kind of like the air and elementalism you were talking about, Ted. It's right
Hmm.
into that. So
Yep.
so that's really easy. But hopefully, at least one of the characters will have a divine bent to them, so that we can explore that a little bit more. Because as a GM, I tend to not do a lot of work on stuff that isn't happening in the game, or maybe the game that we run will involve more religious figures in it, and so we can then explore that some more.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about, creating worlds uh while you play is you have the ability to focus on what it is that the characters are interested in. Now, I normally, as a player, have a lot of angles of faith just because I'm naturally drawn to clerics. No, just because I'm not playing a cleric, in this game or that game doesn't mean, my character doesn't have, religious aspects. They don't always. Now we've been playing now we played Aether Skies, a while ago. And as you mentioned, Ty had a very religious character and, mine wasn't. And, you know, I'm not looking to make a religious character, but if something were to come up in the game, oh well, maybe this means something. Maybe it's time to find religion. And oh, that's great. Now, I know some DMs cringe when you talk about, oh, well, we'll let this come out in game. They're like, no, you have to have all this stuff in advance. And that's not the style that we play. Like, all that's important is, like, 100 feet around the characters. And until you push that bubble, from an interest perspective or a site perspective, it's not needed. Sure. Now, if all of a sudden religion becomes more important and you start adding it in, will that break some of the um immersion? Because it's like, well, how come I didn't notice it before? I don't know. You tell me. Like, it's not always on the DM of having to fill in everything, because I'm not going to describe every single character in immaculate detail as you walk through town. Nobody wants to hear me describe 100 people and tell you all of their names and their backstories and what have you. No GM does that because that takes away from what it is the characters are doing. So I don't know. I'm rambling now. So back to you.
Unless you do, then Ted's available for bookings. Um, so some of my favorite interactions in our first Other Skies game was between Ty's character and your character and Dr. Lucy's character.
Hmm.
You played Bunny, the kobold artificer,
Yep.
and then Robin played Dr. Lucy, an Etherficer, or not Etherficer, Ethermancer.
Yeah. I was
And
an I was an Etherficer. Robin was an Ethermancer.
right, so those two were the most diametrically opposed to Ty's character's belief system, because he was this knight of the anti-ether, this religious zealot. They don't like magic, they don't like ether, and in addition to that, the Theopolis, the city itself, is a bit is doesn't really care for non-humans, and they kind of you have to kind of they have to kind of prove their worth. So seeing the relationship build between those three characters, to me, was a lot of fun. And Ty is also a really good role player. So like, instead of just starting off as, oh, I'm just going to play this really bigoted character, like his character grew as the campaign progressed, and his world views kind of widened. He never like fully agreed with the use of magic or ether, but by the end he could see the value of the individuals that were wielding it, and see them for more than just their characteristics of, this is an elf, this is a kobold, and they wield magic. Matter of fact,
Uh,
some of the best interactions, I would say, Ted, was between you and Ty, because your character, you played him as being very kind of downtrodden, beaten down, and
Servile.
yeah, very servile. And also didn't have a lot of self confidence. But there was definitely a point where Ty's character actually started to recognize and value what he brought to the crew and
Mhm.
his talents, and was actually built. We started building him up. You know, so to see that 180 kind of turnaround through gameplay through this lens of the super religious character, to me was a lot of fun, and it was one of the highlights of that campaign.
I love arcs like that. Now, I would love to kind of get into the head, and spoiler alert for a game that we played 5, 6 plus years ago. I would love to get into his head of like, well, how do you feel now after what happens with Dr. Lucy and the Dark Bunny?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I haven't spoken to Ty in quite some time, which I should reach out. But they did end up taking him out first because they were afraid.
Well, I mean, he was powerful, and he had abilities that were kind of, against what we did and what have you. And Ty is a lot of fun to role play with. And I love the hell out of those interactions. And it's easy for me to play, that those kind of like downtrodden characters. Um, just because it's easy to just be like, all right, well, let's let's shove the attention away from me. Let's lift other people up and downplay whatever it is that I do. And I don't want to do those kind of things all the time because they get really depressing. But it's very, very fun to every so often get into those kind of things. Now, I've got a nod to Bunny with the character that I'm playing, but he is not going to be the same kind of mindset. So
Well,
you don't have to worry about that.
yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to see where the campaign goes and to see what happens as hopefully maybe we get to explore more of the religions and spirituality in that campaign setting. And hey, the gods vanish doesn't necessarily mean they can't come back. That could be a future arc. Who knows? But we'll leave it there for Aether Skies when it comes to gods, religions, and spirituality. All right, so we're going to get ready to jump into the next segment. As always, folks, just remember if you have questions, feel free to ask. If we don't pick them out right away, don't worry about it because we're going to do that at the end. And it does not have to necessarily pertain to what we're talking about.
Yeah, so just put question in front of it, and we will, after we get through, all these things, we will answer your questions, whatever they may be.
All right, let's jump into Under the Dome: God's Religion and Spirituality. I feel like you're going to have a lot more input here, Ted, because you've been working like a madman, hammering away on the keys
Oh, yeah.
under the dome. I think you've almost have like a full campaign written yourself.
I
Setting the
mean,
bar.
I'm working on it. I've got a whole lot going on. Ironically, I've actually got a huge thing, well, not a huge thing. I've got a session planned to be running an Under the Dome game this Friday evening. I've invited a bunch of people from work. It's going to be an 8-person party. Now, one of the cool things about what I'm doing with this world is, while we've talked about, Under the Dome being this post-apocalyptic wasteland, that has been ruined by chaos storms. I've taken chaos storms and you know, I've sliced them up and made a variety. Now, chaos storms themselves have shaped the world. Well, because they've made changes, it is so possible that, there are groups, individuals, possibly whole domes that worship and revere the chaos storms because they have the ability to, create anything, to bring anything. Well, one of the type of storms is called a rift storm. and it has the ability to essentially transport things, whether it be within the campaign setting itself or pull things from elsewhere. And the game that I am running is literally like you guys make your characters. You can be from wherever you want as long as it's a fantasy-esque campaign setting. One dude's like super into Game of Thrones, so I'm like, if he makes something from Westeros, so be it. But then this rift storm is going to like pull them all from wherever they are and drop them outside of the dome city that I'm heavily working on. So there might be a cleric, there might be a paladin, and their faith, their powers aren't going to shut down just because they're here. So that's one way that religion has the ability to impact under the dome is you can technically be from anywhere and still have that faith. You might not get the same interaction that you might in a campaign setting where that God is more prevalent, but that just means that there's more out there, and gods have that ability.
Yeah, so I guess like from the onset in this world, right? None of my players played any clerics, right? Or
Right.
paladins. So no one ever asked, well, what gods can I worship, right? So we've really never addressed it. But that being said, you know, through play, some of the things that have come out in Under the Dome is, inspired by Ted's character and some of the NPCs he created was, the Apex Humanus is a church that believes in body modification, and they they've taken that saying of the body is a temple to a whole new level, and they believe in fortifying it, decorating it, rebuilding it, tearing it down, and doing it all over again. And so above the place that you guys would go and sell monster body parts to essentially for these body mods, there's actually a church with pews and a pulpit and where they have held ceremonies. You guys even attended a few of them. It's a religion. They just believe in transcending the humanity of their bodies and seeing it elevated to wherever it can go.
Now, the great part about this is the individual chooses like what they feel is the transcendence for them. So my character that I'm playing in this game is a Simic hybrid sorcerer, and I'm playing one of the Nerdarchy created subclasses. So it's the elemental mutation sorcerer. So it's all about experimental process, for this particular character. So when I made, what this dude looks like, he was statted out initially, background wise, he was human, but this NPC that wound up becoming my or backstory wise was my mentor, my creator, and is now kind of like the campaign villain. Um, but my character's got like this kind of golden orange skin, violet, violently blue and purple hair that's like up in a top knot. He's got these Roth horns that are multicolored. He's got claws that he can climb through his sorceress abilities. He's got the ability to get extra arms. He goes into battle coated in crystalline armor. It's a whole thing to be like, well, I was born human and this is what I look like now. It's insane. But that's exactly what the Apex Humanus is like, oh, you want to add something to your body? There's a cost involved, and you gotta find the parts or pay somebody to get the parts, but somebody can just sit there and find a way to graft it to you. One of the players in the game has actually got a wyvern tail, and he's a Path of the Beast barbarian that the barbarian naturally gets the tail through his rage, but he's like, well, I want the tail all the time, and this will give me, some poison attack to go along with it. So like we dived heavily into, this aspect, not necessarily from like a completely religious bent, but from, an interest bent. And like my character got nothing out of the Roth horns. It's just, well, the boss has this whole goat theme going on. So I'm like, well, I want goat horns to, make the boss happier. It was silly, but I did it.
Sometimes you do what you got to do to make the boss happy. Yeah. So there's and also like definitely there's been a lot of like street level occult stuff going on in Under the Dome. You guys have visited the Three Maggies,
Yep.
uh, and and so I like the idea of doing these worlds where you don't have the traditional D&D pantheons, and I'm thinking like I'm thinking that I want to steer away from that, but in Under the Dome, there's plenty of room uh for like gods to just spring out of nowheres because of the nature of the chaos, right? But
Hmm.
also, as quickly as they could appear, they could also
Vanish.
vanish. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So you mean you would put in the Carnival of Chaos and your ridiculous penny whistle pie plow. Now I've taken this a little bit further and saying that there could very well be another entity attached to this whole thing. And I should have gotten the thing out, but if you look over at Thursday, the 2 weeks past, uh, there is a mini for, I kid you not, from McFarlane Toys, the Joker Dragon. The thing is freaking badass and fits so perfectly onto a battle map. It's insane. So I don't know if Dave has any desire to ever, use this, but I had to pick it up from the moment I saw it. Um, you know, so I did a stat for the Joker Dragon. I did a whole lair for the Joker Dragon with a, small little, adventure outline attached to it. So you can check out both of those. But I feel it fits so perfectly with this Carnival of Chaos. Um, so I had to, had to make that attachment. Um, and it's entirely possible that, if Dave ever decides, before this campaign is over to play more with the carnival, I got a great mini.
Well, so the thing too is about the Carnival of Chaos, right? So I used a monster from Cobalt Press called the Grim Jester. And
Hmm.
it's a fun monster. It is a real pain in the ass for the players. And the funny thing about the Grim Jester is they can't be killed unless their death is, they can't be forever killed unless their death happens in a comical way because they've been cursed by a death god. And since we introduced Penny Whistle High Plow into the campaign, the Grim Jester, that would mean somewhere there is a death god out there that cursed him, right?
Right.
Which we haven't touched on, so there's definitely that's out there. Um, there's also the Church of the Crystalline Form
Hmm.
that was founded by a Luxodon mystic known as Manish, who both Styx and Baba Ra spent some time with studying and meditating. So
Oh, I went there as well because I like my elemental, armor, like I summon my, crystal to coat myself,
yes,
which they wanted to study.
yeah, well, yeah, and also I think you were intrigued to him by him as well because he's a Loxodon, but his tusks are made of crystal, not
Yes.
not ivy or whatever Loxodon tusks are. Hopefully, it's not
So
ivy, or if it is, I wonder if there's a illicit black market for Loxodon.
now we've discovered, quite a lot of, um, Titan energy, within within this particular campaign world. We've literally fought a world-sized Titan that was chasing us down, a number of sessions back that we didn't actually defeat it. We just put it back to sleep.
Yeah.
So it's
I wouldn't really say you fought it per se.
we, we had a fight and it was there. Uh, but it was a scenario that, like, if people are aware of that much power, of course, that could be, a situation that could be worshipped. I've got a dome in this city that is entirely ruled by giants, so I would imagine they're above everything else. Titan worship would be, the prevalent thing because the Titans are, the natural superiors to giants because the bigger it is, the stronger it is, and that's what that's the way they work. Um, but it's also a place that, you know, whether we're, completely open to it or not, I mean, there is definitely a nod to Dark Sun with Under the Dome. And, Dark Sun is all about the elementalism. So I think that would fit in a place like this, easily. And there are places that, earth, air, fire, and water are going to be, the natural order of things. So, like, this could be a direction where, okay, well, if you are playing this kind of priest, then, naturally you would want to go towards, one of those sections and, see what it's like.
Also, you guys have encountered druidic traditions. Also, you're assuming like when I say Titan, I mean like D&D Monster Manual, old school Titan, and not like the Greek gods took out the Titans to become the premier gods. So
I kind of have a meshed versions of all of it.
yeah.
I view Titans as, like, the ancestors to the giants. Um, so
Although 5e kind of replaced Titans with Empyreans, uh, which
okay, well,
which are kind of like um I want to say they make them like the vassals or champions of the gods in 5e.
Empyreans are they're celestials,
Yes.
where I view Titans as something outside the typical realm of celestial. They would be its own category.
Well, yeah, they were their own thing in previous editions, especially in first edition. So, or first and second, old school AD and D. Um, but that being said, so yeah, so like again, like I want to focus on building out, these non traditional faiths and religions for Under the Dome, and kind of get away from the pantheons of traditional D&D games. I like the idea of doing the elementalism. Chaos itself might get worshipped because it's such a big part of the world itself. It is a force that everyone in Under the Dome has to deal with in some way or shape or form or another. I mean, early on, you guys went out to scavenge a crystal cache because of a big storm happening. The only problem is, I think a giant crystalline worm-like creature was kind of left behind. And you
Hmm.
guys are like, oh, this is going to be a big score. But unfortunately, it drew Thri-Kreen from everywhere, and they just set up shop and made it their mecca. Right?
Yep.
Religion has been expressed throughout the campaign without us ever really introducing any gods. And it happened fairly organically through the campaign and the way we kind of play.
Yeah, it's fun to have those moments of things that happen in game dictate what's going on in the world. And, you know, I, I I'm curious to know, like, that was, one of the earlier sessions. So that happened, 2 years ago. I don't know how much time has passed in game, but we've never gone back to see like if it was, did a chaos storm create a, monstrous worm-shaped creature, or was there, a purple worm, or as in our world, churn malls, that was changed by the storm into this, crystalline, structure. Um, you know, and whatever the case may be, is what have the Thri-kreen done with it? Have they built up a dome around it? Have they built up their own, encampment or city, by this thing? Um, you know, I is Ted, not so much my character, but me, I want to know, what is transpired at that location, because that has the ability to shape, future games. Are there other things like that have drawn uh, races or peoples, to it?
Well, that kind of, it's kind of funny because because as we build these campaigns out, and the idea is we were going to turn them into our own campaign settings to put out there for other people to enjoy and play in. Then we have to start looking at um you know what things are like purely D&D that that we have kind of been using, but in our own campaign, we're not really going to be able to do that, because of IP and stuff like that, which is fine. It just gives us an opportunity to kind of expand and grow, grow out our own things. And so like I'm thinking that since Thri-kreen were a big part of it early on, we could then you know maybe since you guys have kind of left it alone and haven't messed with it, the Thri-kreen have kind of evolved and changed, and it could be because of this crystalline purple worm that they're worshiping. And a mantis folk might just be one of the iterations. 'Cause I was thinking of like doing a whole kind of caste system with different types of insects, and maybe this is where it kind of all starts from from that particular um instance, right? And it gives us and it also creates a cool place for opportunity for us to take some of the D&D lore, and for us to move away from it and kind of personalize it.
Well, I've taken the aspect of, um all of the things that I might, want to use D&D. And from the start of my planning here, is I want to make my own things, so that if we wind up, going to a point, whether it's putting it up on the website or actually releasing a product, that I don't have to backtrack. Now, there was no thought of this, no concept of this when you started the campaign 2+ years ago. And again, we hit Thri-kreen early on. So you and I talked a little bit before about, reshaping the Thri-kreen. So I've got ideas that have already been, kind of put down on, pen to paper, digital paper, as to, what that might look like. Taking the aspects of, what the Thri-kreen are, insectile, but possibly different, but still being able to, you know, make their crystalline weapons, but maybe they do it through the grind. So the thing that I've come up with is the Kranathi, and they're also referred to as the grind shapers.
So yeah, so it's just like it creates these fun opportunities for us to explore, different things. And what does that mean? These Thri-kreen are worshiping this particular place, does the power of worship that they provide then empower it even more? You know, can other people do that, right? Can other species come in and be like, yeah, you know what, I also believe in this thing? And by doing that, you know, if and also maybe the Thrycreen themselves have developed shamans or clerics, you know, because of their belief in this religious site.
Yeah, and that's the whole aspect of you know, playing and building it out as you go. Um, and you make the changes where you need it, and where you don't bother. You don't care.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, Under the Dome is another campaign setting that we're working on that again does not have any actual traditional D&D pantheons or gods as you may be familiar with from, you know, a lot of the other settings out there. And I kind of want to keep it that way and keep exploring the idea of religions, you know, that aren't pantheons, you know, they're more monolithic, or the worship of ideals more, you know, more so than a particular deity. Uh, so let's jump into our next segment, our final segment, Zoo Mafia. This one is a little trickier, right? Zoo Mafia is the role playing game that we have developed and are working on using our own system, the D666 system, and it happens during Prohibition, um, where you know booze has booze has been outlawed. It's the 1920s, 1930s. You're a zoo animal in a zoo by day. By night, you have a secret pet of life thing going on where you're trying to get made into the mob. And we have not touched on religion in this game at all. But you know what? Whenever you watch any of a lot of the like Godfather movies or mafia style shows, there are definitely references and, you know, iconography and, you know, a lot of symbolism and just, you know, the religion interlaced throughout it, even though, you know, they're criminals.
Yeah, that was exactly the direction that I was going to go. Is, if you look at The Godfather, it's there, and there are tenets, there are beliefs that are supposed to be done, and you could approach it from a broad paintbrush to putting it in the background of, okay, well, what if you've got a mafioso, a don, a mob boss who's like, well, I'm on a holy war. I'm going to cleanse anybody who doesn't believe the way I do. And he's, drawing people, to him, and anybody that stands in his way, they're just going to get gunned down. Absolutely, an aspect of faith. You have the ability to put in whatever religious bent that you want, as you shape your own world. But if you look at The Godfather, like, it's based off of you know characters who have real world religions, and they're gonna do this or you're gonna do that. you know Imagine, if you've got a goon who, before the start of every job, was like, oh, hold on a second, and they take a knee, they pull out their cross, and they do a prayer. um you could have a grifter who, like, in all of their negotiations and all of their things, like, they're pulling out scriptures, to kind of convince those people that they're trying to get one over on, that they're in the right and they're doing the right thing. And religion says so. Or what about a safecracker that just pulls out some kind of lucky token that he's always got to have it on him. I mean, throughout movies, there's always been, oh my God, where is my, insert whatever thing here. It happens all the time. And whether it be, my lucky penny, or, my lucky cross, it could be whatever, but that's still a religious bent. That's still a thing that's, it's not quite worship, but it's needed. It's a belief.
Yeah, you know, so like me automatically, I think of Catholicism.
Hmm.
You know, both with the Italians, the Sicilians, the Irish, right? But also there's like I just googled it real quick, but Buddhism and Hinduism also have like sects that are implicated as well. So like to me, the question is with a game like Zoo Mafia, do you kind of like lean into real world religions, um, and kind of use that, or do you do like an animal parody version of religions, you know, and kind of like create your own thing, where the animals have all animal versions of characters from the Bible or whatever religion that they're happening to be following. So like
So, are you saying that the animals in the zoo should worship dog?
maybe they might. I mean, he is a good boy, but again, and also like exploring these avenues in your own game is one thing, but in something we publish we have to be kind of careful, and especially because it is a it's a sensitive topic, and we don't want people to think we're making fun of their faith or religion, but at the same time it feels like it should be an important part of it, because the game is based off of loosely based off of historical 1920s 1930s prohibition and those mafias, those mobs, right? So
Right. So, like when you're mixing religion and violence, it does get to be a touchy subject, and because of it, I felt like with previous conversations, that's not or previous campaigns, that's not a direction that I felt like I needed to go in. But if you kind of like backtrack through um the campaigns that we've run, I think the closest that we've gotten to any kind of religious bent in the games here on the channel is when Bobby ran Blood Moonshine, the whole magic mysticism angle of things. I felt, even though it wasn't, kind of hit over the head with, I think like there were religious characters who were into the mysticism stuff, more so than, a deity, but I felt that definitely to me, ranks as religious.
yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and but again too, like by adding that in, and it's something to think about, in our games going forward when we play Zoo Mafia, both when we stream it or just in our home games, right? Like, what would religion look like in that world? How do these characters in this world interact with it? How does it kind of jive with their values? Um, and what does it mean, right? Like, I feel like we've kind of missed out on that. Maybe having some cool scenes that happen, in a church, right? During a church sermon, right? In the back, maybe you're like quietly like praying and attending, but also you're having this clandestine meeting with another another character from the underworld. That would be kind of a cool thing to happen. But and also too, like it, if you decide to play a character that's deeply religious, and maybe you do confessionals and you have scenes with a with a priest or a father, that can really add some depth and some really interesting role playing scenarios to your game.
So, my notes on this is like, are there sacred grounds? Are there places where like even, the mobsters aren't willing to shed blood or do harm? Sure, if we were to do like as I'm doing in Furton City, where you could have full on, temples or sacred places, but like in a zoo, like is there a spot, that's like, oh well, is there a hidden shrine somewhere, that people come to pray and to do their
Maybe,
thing?
but didn't like
Um,
Jesus say something about when one or more or two or more of my people or us, gather, blah blah blah.
that's church.
I'm not very religious, to be honest with you guys. but so like you don't even need to have a formal location. Like I understand what you're saying, and that is definitely something to work in, and I think it's actually kind of cool.
Hmm.
That the animals might have a hidden church someplace, but also like maybe they just hold sermons out in the open in a field.
Right. Sure. Are there religious festivals or rituals? I mean, here in the US, like, okay, well, we have, Christmas and we have Easter and, what have you. So, like, what religious holidays would the animals have? And, like, like that's going to be based off of actual events that happen, there. I would imagine in a game like, Blood Moonshine that there would be things possibly related to maybe the um the equinox or things along those lines, because for mysticism those change of seasons mean something, so like you just have to kind of take what you've got and say, okay, well, what does that beget, and it helps build things. But when you're playing a typical where animals in a zoo, I've always approached this as an aspect of the animals are smarter than the humans. Like, I've laughed at them numerous times because it's like they're too stupid to realize that we do all of this stuff. But so you could take it in two different directions. You could be like, well, the humans have a deity, and maybe the animals kind of fear that deity, or like you could turn it on its side, and the animals actually worship the humans, but you don't interact with the humans because they're so far above you. And that could be a whole another way of playing. Like, okay, well, sure, you lose your markers, but you know that's a scary thing to go and literally interact with your deity.
Well, so you got me kind of thinking a little bit too. Like, um, one is like when you talk about the humans are stupid and you make fun of them. What if like that's one of the things they make fun of. It's like, oh, like they're using our religion, but they got it all wrong. Like, and you swap out all the famous characters and important biblical characters and replace them with animal versions, right? And
Mhm.
and that's how the animals do it. Or um you know or maybe they talk about it a different way, like when being descendants of Eden, like kind of like the humans when they're all cast out together, and they all do follow the same religion, but they blame the humans because they messed it up, right? Because they had the Garden of Eden. Everyone had the Garden in Eden. And also another thing I just thought of was the South Park episode with the Pope.
I don't remember the specifics, but I know it's South Park, so it's not going to be good.
So the reason why the Pope wears the hat like that is because he's actually the Easter Bunny. So I mean, like, you can literally just do that, right? Like, there's so many different ways you can go. You can go super serious with it. You can kind of do making a silly parody. You could do it that they kind of just share the same religion. But either way, you look at it, like some of the biggest mobs in America at that time would have been the Irish and the Italians, right? And they all kind of shared the same religion. And you're right, they probably did have rules and taboos about doing certain things. Like you probably wouldn't perform a hit at a church, even though that would be like one of the easier spots. Like just like they had rules about not doing it in front of the family and things like that. So these are all things that you can explore, and and maybe that's a place where two dons might meet because it's considered neutral ground where they're not going to actually do anything. Um, against each other because it goes against a taboo that not even they're willing to.
Yeah. So like there's lots of things that could be done. I see like whether you want to bring in, real world religion, you could have pages that have been torn out of a Bible, and you only have a snippet of, what your religious text is, or it could very well be things that are handed down and everything is just so completely wrong from, what was there because maybe it was just a verbal tradition. And as we all know, whisper down the lane can really distort a lot of things. So over generations, the animals got it wrong,
Yeah.
and now they're doing one thing, and yay, violence is the answer.
So, I guess like kind of in conclusion, in a game like Zoo Mafia, it's really easy to overlook religion, and spirituality and the gods because mechanically it doesn't do anything. Where in
Right.
other RPGs we play, it's a big part of the game. Matter of fact, like many games have character classes or archetypes that are built specifically around that. But just because there's a mechanical reason doesn't mean there can't be an exploration or role play reason to do it, where it can add some real depth to your game and to the campaigns you're running. So with that, that's our three segments. There was a couple questions. If you guys have anything else you want to talk about or ask, feel free. Um, I'll just go kind of in order. Montedil. I can't pronounce. But anyway, question of 5e: did Wizards of the Coast really get into religion like they did in some of the earlier editions? I want to say, for the most part, none of the core books ever did. I would say the difference between previous editions and 5e when it comes to religion and the gods is the splat books, right? The other the other editions had way more splat books, so they probably had a specific splat book on these things, or it would be covered way more in depth in maybe a campaign specific setting book, or
Well, if you go back to second edition, I mean, there was deities and demigods.
yeah.
It was an entire book dedicated to religions, across the multiverse. Absolutely, campaign settings like Forgotten Realms literally had a breakdown of all of the different deities that were in there. I never really got into Dragonlance. I can only assume that one did as well. If you look at Eberron also has, their breakdowns in regards to the different deities that was used for that setting so that you could really be able to play it up. I myself am super into you know religion when it comes to making characters because it's an easy RP angle to look at. Even if I'm not playing a cleric or a paladin in a campaign or in a world where it's not a question of whether the gods exist or not. It's the gods exist. They have literally hoisted their power upon the world. Why would you not choose to worship one or more?
It's hard
So like I have
it's hard to
plenty
be
of
an
characters who are
atheist.
probably theistic.
It's hard to be an atheist in a fantasy world, right? Like in like D&D, just because there's
Yes.
so much, it's so present in the world. But yeah, I would say the main difference between 5e and previous editions is there were more splat books to address that, and 5e they've gone in a different direction, so they don't. So those splat books they come out with don't really delve that deep. Brian Smith, can you have a lobster mobster in Zoo Mafia? Of course, you can have a lobster mobster, uh, a lobster mobster, and you should. Um,
That's for the aquarium edition, I think.
yeah, yeah. Well, we did do a SeaWorld version, um, or a session or two.
Yeah.
John, can a Zoo Mafia campaign last more than 12 sessions? It's like any RPG. It can last as long as you want to keep playing it. Eventually your characters will kind of get a bit maxed out, and it may be more difficult when we put out the complete rule set. We'll have rules. We have the rules for advancement, but then we'll also have rules for advanced advancement. But even then, eventually, like the characters are going to have so much stuff going on, um, it won't be great. But also too, you can always slow down advancement, right? Like in the games that we play, we generally give 2 XP per session, and then whenever you get a failure, if you only gave XP on failures, that would slow it down, or only XP on failures with a minimum, that would slow it down. But so like
You could also, instead of two per session, you can give one per session. I mean, I've definitely played, several sessions and not roll any failures because it's like, all right, well, if by chance or by choice I'm only rolling the things that I'm good at, then okay, well, then I'm not going to get, the failure XP. Um, you know, but the style that we've been playing has been, you're looking to get made. There's nothing to say that, you couldn't just play the game, get made, and then continue working for that boss until, some other thing is done. Oh well, I want complete and total domination of the zoo or the city, and I'm going to take out all of these things. There's always, a bigger fish to fry, kind of speak. Um, so you could play for as long as you want. We've just been typically doing 12 because like that is a good story arc, and at 2 hours a session, that pretty much means you can like, okay, it's 24 hours of gameplay for one story. That's enough to really tell a fun narrative story and be able to move on. And we switch systems, we switch GMs, and switch characters.
right. And really, if you're going by what we do on the channel, well, all of our games are 12 sessions, right? So it doesn't
Right.
really matter whether it's Zoo Mafia or not. But although it looks like the current Zoo Mafia game might go to 13
Yeah, this one is going to go to 13. We've got some a minor tweak that has to happen.
tomorrow night. So I don't see any more questions in the chat, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. Sorry we've been really spotty with the games in the chats lately. Partially it's been my fault because I've been more sick with like the cold and flu, nothing crazy, in 2025 than I feel like I've ever been in my life. So partially my fault, and it's just been like running through the group like crazy too. So hopefully we'll get past that. We'll get more regular. But with that, until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.